Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Agbiz Grain Symposium this morning. A very warm welcome to everybody who joins us here in the auditorium and everybody online. We hope you enjoy the day with us today and ask a lot of questions. Then especially welcome to all the panel members, Francois, Vuyo, Ferdi, Theo. Welcome to you. We're really seeing forward to the discussion today and for the next 4 days coming after this today. I hope you enjoy it and welcome to everybody. Then especially I want to welcome there's going to be a short inlet with Jannie. Thank you.
Good day. Today's message comes in the form of a question that Jesus actually poses to his disciples. And the question was, don't you remember? And maybe for the bean counters, you can even call this message 571. Now the message starts off with a setting where Jesus feeds the 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And we learned about this miracle that happened. And after that, there were quite a few other miracles of people that got healed, blind that could start seeing, and even a girl that was demon-possessed that got free. And we see the next event happen when Jesus also fed 4,000 people with 7 loaves. So that was the 5 loaves and the 7 loaves, and there were even a lot of bread left afterwards that they've collected. And immediately after that, they left for a trip on the sea. And the trip was estimated about 6 hours. But the disciples started, talking to each other and debating about they only got 1 loaf. And they're not sure how they're going to survive, and I can just imagine how they start with a blame game. I think all of you are very familiar with that. If something goes wrong, they were asking Matthew, where's the minutes and what was the exact decision, who was responsible for this, and maybe they asked Judas about the budget and, why weren't there money for buying loaves. And then we find that Jesus is not so concerned about these earthly things. And he was more concerned about the faith than the bread of his disciples. And my question to you, and the one that actually struck me was, don't you remember, Jannie? Don't you remember how I fed the 5,000? Don't you remember how I fed the 4,000? Now you are concerned that the 13 of us won't be able to survive on 1 loaf of bread. And this is a very important question to you as well, because we all want to be remembered, and we are definitely remembering the Lord very well when it comes to very tough times. If you get sick or there's some trouble in your business or at home in your relationships, we all want the Lord to remember us, and then we also remember him. But there's also a time in your life when you might think that the Lord should not just remember this thing. When you've done some sin, we read a lot about that in the Psalms where David was actually coming back to the Lord and say, I've sinned and I don't want you to remember this, and please don't keep it to me. The other thing that happened was, the Bible is full of reminders. And I think, we've got today in our phones and our diaries a lot of reminders. But the Bible is full of reminders that we should remember the Lord. We should remember where we come from, what he has done for us, and the things that's really important in life. So for me, I think this is the question today for us to consider, what the Lord has done. And if we start getting concerned about the bread and all those sort of things in life, and whether the finances will be enough, whether the weather will be good for the next season, whether there will be food enough in the country, all those of concerns, the Lord is actually standing in front of you today and say, don't you remember how I've cared for you, how I saved for you? I want to conclude with 3 very important remembers. The first one was when Peter discovered that he actually denied the Lord. And when the crow, he heard the crow in the background, the Bible said he remembered what the Lord has said. And this was a very important turning point in his life to think he can't just rely on his own understanding and his own abilities to do things. The second remember is actually a very great one, and that was one of the criminals on the cross next to Jesus when he said, Lord, remember me when you get to your kingdom. And that changed that guy's destiny forever. And maybe you haven't done that remember thing in your life, and that is something that you can consider to change your life for the best. The last one was the one that actually struck me the most, and that was when David met his Goliath. And everybody would say, you're crazy to fight this big giant. And David started by saying, I remember when the lion attacked me and he wants to attack the sheep, or take some of the sheep. I remember how the Lord gave me strength to kill it. I remember about the bear. And if I remember these things in my life, all those difficult things that you have overcome over all these years, and you can remember and you can rely and you can trust like David the Lord to kill your Goliath. So, don't you remember, Yanni? And when I got to the end of this study, I found out, I have to remember where I come from, that I was a sinner, and that I actually can remember how I was saved. And that gave me the strength and the trust in the Lord to continue and looking forward to the life ahead.
Thank you, Yanni, for the kind words. We really appreciate that. I just want to thank our sponsors for today that makes this symposium possible for us. There's a couple of sponsors that I want to mention here. Our platinum sponsors was Agbiz Grain Management and John Deere Financial. The gold sponsors are APSA and Stargate Scientific. The silver sponsors are Nedbank, NWK, Senwest and Standard Bank. And then the bronze sponsors are Agri-Environment Solutions, F&B, OVK, Ronan Solutions, Santam Agricultural, Centraal Suid Koöperasie, VKB, and WAM South Africa. Very heartfelt thanks to you to make this possible for us. And I want to introduce Wessel, who will give us a short introduction in today's session. Thank you, Wessel.
Tom, thank you. I just want to ask if Armand just can online there check if Dominic joined us on the panel. Dominic from Werksmans is also going to join us. And then I want to encourage you in terms of your participation. We have registered for this for people in the auditorium until Friday, and then also online. There's about 400 registrations, so it's very good, and thank you. And we're going to give you, at the end of this session, a book from Wandile that's released last week. He will present it, it's signed, so it's a very special copy. So Class Media is going to help us with that. They're going to identify the best contributor from the audience. Sorry, not the panel. Then I would like to, just to introduce the topic today. I'm going to keep it brief. The topic is the sustainability of the storage structure and return on investment. If we conclude today, I think we must realize, and it must be clear why we don't see investment in long-term storage in cement structures. We see the short-term storage, investment in storage structures. Now, since 1994, if you take all the grains and oilseeds together, that production increase for all those 9 commodities was about 98%. It doubled up. The last 4 years, the growth in the grain and oilseed sector, if you take a straight line 5-year average, it's about 6.9% per year. So it's very good. Looking forward, we must ask ourselves, where is this storage structures going to come from? They are near their lifetime, 40, 50 years, maybe more, and we need actual storage in good infrastructure for food security purposes that you can store in the long term. Now in the EU, the average, there's a benchmark. So the average 5-year production growth, if you invest more than the 5-year average production, you actually overinvest. If it's less than that, it's underinvestment. So you need to have the storage capacity in the country that must equal an average of 5%. So there's also additional demands. There's demands for segregation, there's demands for greater traceability, there's demands for a generic passport system. But you need to have sufficient storage space for that. And then, why is investment not happening? What is the real issue? Because why did we manage to invest that big investments in the cement storage structures, but not going forward now? And I think that is one of the reasons, and that we're going to have a look at. And if you look at the PPI, I'm going to conclude with this. The JSE storage rate is based on the PPI. And the PPI does not reflect reality of storage costs in our sector. Just to give you an indication, the final manufacturing goods, the PPI for final manufacturing goods is used as the benchmark for JSE to adjust the JSE storage rates. You're not fighting with the JSE, were you? We're talking about the PPI. No? So by using the PPI, it's actually it's not good enough. So if you look at the PPI, there's a lot of issues that affect the PPI. In the metropolitan areas, service delivery is much more better than in the rural areas. The PPI contribution to the GDP declined from 25% to 16%. Is that PPI relevant? The costs in the rural areas, everybody can tell you that cost and unit cost is much more than in the cities. So, and then to conclude, I've used a straight line. I take the straight line, compare the JSE storage rates, because that's, or the PPI, compare that over a 22 and a 12-year period. And if you look at that straight line, the storage rates should reflect, if you compare it with the growth in the maize price, to make that comparison, it should be 130 and not 107 rand like today. And the PPI and the JSE storage rate is across the whole country. So your domestic environment where you do business doesn't play a role. It's actually administered storage rate. So if you look at the JSE, if you compare the JSE with the CME storage rate, in 2018, those two were on par as a percentage of the corn price or the maize price. Looking at it now, guess what? We are back lower to about 25%, 30% under that rate, and it comes to the same amount, 130, 134 per ton, what the JSE storage rate should be. And did we have that kind of storage rates, and the storage rates was decoupled from something like the PPI, then we would see investment probably better than today. And it's not a reflection on the JSE. They need to use something as a benchmark, but we need to get something better in place of that. And I think if we can go out today and get some discussion about that view, that will be perfect for me, because then I know what to do in the next 2 years and get, I don't want to, we have a lot of sectors here also, but please contribute, ask questions, and everybody's free. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. Theo is going to facilitate the meeting for us today. Welcome, Theo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. The session will be split into two components, or two parts. We will first have a session that's roughly an hour. We'll have a 10-minute break, and then another session, again, roughly an hour. So it's now just after 9:15. The first part will probably go to about 10:15. I'm going to allow questions from time to time. I'm going to stop. If you have a question, I will then allow it then. That question will be, press the little button on your desk. You will be heard by everybody. Pose the question, and we'll take the question from time to time. If you're online, you're welcome to post the question. I've got the instrument in front of me, and I will get the questions. Remember, the participant who is the most active in participating here in this today here with us will get a signed copy of Wandila's book. I bought the book last night on the airport flying up from Cape Town, and it is an interesting read. I think it is worthwhile everybody to read the book. It is worth our while. So, before further ado, let me introduce my panel first of all, and then I will start the discussion. Next to me is Professor Ferdi Meyer. He's the Managing Director of BFAP. Ferdi, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you.
Next to him, Vuyo Mpuza, who is the Commodities Derivative Manager at the JSE. Vuyo, thank you for attending. You have heard Tom Meintjes. He's here as Vice Chairperson of Agbiz Grain. Tom, thank you very much. And then on my far left, Francois Strydom, the CEO of Senvest. Now, I am going to start with Francois. The topic is sustainability of storage structure and return on investment. Now, in terms of those two elements, obviously it comes down to capital. What is your view on that, and how do you, as an owner and manager of storage infrastructure, how do you view that?
Thank you, Theo. So, without being overly technical about it, if you make an investment, it has to reach the minimum hurdle rate. And the hurdle rate is your cost of capital and, of course, the risk premium of that specific investment or your business. Now, to reach that minimum, capital is a so-called coward. It will flee. It will flow to wherever it gets returns. So if you subsidize it within your business, with other businesses, a specific investment, in the end it will catch up with you. So you have to constantly, as a business entity, create alpha. So that's the sort of the minimum hurdle rate. The question then could be, but what if you reach it and you over invest, or the returns is too high? Well, the free market sorts that out. Competition sorts that out. You will be forced to come down to the level where you meet the competition. So on a sustainable basis, pure and simple, if you make an investment like a storage investment, you have to service that through the minimum rate of return. And just by looking at the sector, Wessel spoke to that, if there isn't investment or there's overinvestment, both those trends tells you a specific story.
So from your point of view, there's a cost of capital. If you don't achieve the cost of capital, obviously you're destroying wealth. On the other side, there's a risk-free return currently at 10 to 12% on the government bonds. That's also something you take into consideration. And capital will follow if the return is there.
Absolutely. So if you have those two,
Something will go. Somewhere it's going to catch up.
you can see the consolidation.
So from a cost allocation point of view, and the topic is sustainability of storage structure and return on investment. If that portion is not there, the sustainability will come into question.
Absolutely. Your investment will move. Allocation of capital is probably the most important thing in your business. So you have access to capital, and that capital comes from...
It's got a price.
Either the fund, the financing from your financiers and your shareholder funds. And remember, your shareholder funds are always more expensive than that which you borrow. So the so-called gearing in your business is absolutely important.
Where does the JSE fit into what we're talking about now? And I'm going to steer this question towards specifically the structure of pricing at the JSE, but where does the JSE fit into this?
So thank you, Theo. I think for the JSE, I think firstly, let me just acknowledge all the storage operators that are here, and the viewers that are listening online, as well as everyone here at the Grain building. I think for storage operators, I think it's very important the role that they play in the JSE, but then also in the whole agricultural ecosystem, because I think they're there for the safekeeping of our food security, which is very important, I think, globally. And secondly, I think for the JSE, I think I should be careful with what I say, but I think the role that we play as a JSE is to provide a platform for willing buyers and sellers. But then at the end of the day, because our futures contracts go into physical delivery, so the role that storage operators play is very important for us, because the storage operator has to guarantee the quality and quantity in a specific location and at a delivery point in time. So basically, we're going into a commitment in future when you take a futures position. So I think it is of utmost importance that the safekeeping of the commodities is guaranteed when it comes to storage operators in the South African market. So I think that's the role that the JSE plays, and also acknowledging the partnerships and the agreements that we have with the storage operators in South Africa.
From your point of view, the costing and the structure of that costing, just to reflect a bit on that, why is it so important?
So basically, I think it is very important because remember, when you take a position in the futures market or derivatives market, you are taking a commitment for a future delivery in time. So basically, it is important that we standardize our contracts or terms of agreement, so that when one takes a position today, he knows that in future he's going to get certain storage rate that is fixed, a certain location, as well as standardized quality and quantity in the face value of a salary receipt. So that is very important. Hence, we're saying the JSE's role here today is just to come and listen and hear the divergent views of all the market participants, but we're saying we need one single number that we can use in terms of charging a maximum storage rate for any JSE salary receipts. So that's important.
In order for you, in your current environment, to standardize the pricing?
100%.
Now, Ferdi, that storage rate, a lot of discussion is around that storage rate, because that is also pivotal in terms of the capital and the return on capital. Your views on that storage rate?
Yeah, too. So I think the existing one that the JSE uses, and that's what Vessel has alluded to, is based on PPI adjustments in a year. And the argument's basically that hasn't kept track with the increases that we've seen in actual storage costs. So how do we solve this? How do we go and benchmark and measure and say what's accurate? Because Vuyo says they would like, obviously for them, for all of us, it's good if it's as accurate as possible to attract the capital, to have future investments, and we can talk about all those angles. But if you think about the study Vessel that you guys have already completed, which was already one step in a direction where you have a look, what are there indexes that we can use to weigh, to say, it's not the PPI aggregate, there are very specific indexes like electricity, labor. You can break it up, you can weigh it, you can ask silos saying, what are the different, what's the weighting, the cost weighting in the index, in your total costs, and then you take this adjustment. And that study was done, and it's getting relatively close to PPI. So the next step would then be, well, then these indexes are not accurate enough. And that's a step, I think, where the industry is standing, saying, could we then, that implies we have to go and find the actual costs. And the moment when you start to find the actual costs, and this is now part of the debate, obviously, going forward, is how do we do this? There's a practical way of doing it. You have to actually go and collect data. But then it becomes tricky with competition commission issues and all the elements that are involved in that. The moment that you start to collect, and we need to think about that, how we can get over that hurdle. So that's in short.
I just want to get online. We've got Dominique Arteiro, Director of Werksman's Attorneys. Is Dominique online?
Hi.
Dominique, welcome to the discussion. Ferdi touched on the element of sharing, and where does the Competition Commission, from a sharing of information point of view for a study like this, would fit in?
Sorry, Theo, you broke up there a little bit. Could you just repeat the question?
Yes, the question is around, Ferdi noted that in order to do a study in terms of the real cost underlying, there is a need to share information. Now, obviously, if you start to share information with participants in a specific industry, you start to touch on the Competition Commission. Can you just elaborate on why that's a challenge and what the real underlying position is?
Yeah, certainly will do. I think Professor Ferdi was quite right. Once you step into the realm of exchanging competitively sensitive information between competitors, one's got to tread very carefully. And it's regardless of the industry. So let me just start off by saying that benchmarking is one of these double-edged swords, in the sense that the Competition Commission recognizes that the exchange of aggregated and historical data or information in certain circumstances could be pro-competitive. So benchmarking things such as best practices or general trends in the market, or benchmarking best practices for health and safety reasons, is typically considered best practices. Obviously, one needs to make an assessment with all the facts of the particular case. But as a general principle, benchmarking and the exchange of competitively sensitive information in the right environment could be pro-competitive, could be good for competition, and it could be good for consumer welfare. However, the risk, the way that our legislation has been drafted, is that if competitors share competitively sensitive information between one another, it could give rise to one of two things. Either coordination or collusion between competitors, which could lead to things such as price fixing or market division, or it could have a substantial effect on competition in a particular market. So, for example, when one is talking about cost benchmarking, that's the type of area where one should tread very, very carefully, and one should be clear on the purpose for which the information is required. And one also has to be very clear and precise as to what information is gathered, how it's gathered, who assimilates that, if it's an independent third party, for example, and how that information is then collated and shared with the members.
So where are we in terms of what the challenge here is about that cost, and the challenge is information around that cost. So how would you describe this challenge, and where should one look at trying to find a solution?
Yeah, I think those are the right questions to be asking, and they're obviously difficult questions. So one of the factors I think that's relevant, and I think it was Vessel that mentioned it in the introduction, is that when you are benchmarking costs, you'd be doing so across all these silo owners, across various jurisdictions or various localities. So the silos are situated in different areas around South Africa. The specific costs of that particular silo might be similar to nearby silos, but it's going to be different from a silo that's 300 kilometers away. So one of the things to think about is, even if one is able to put together this cost benchmarking information in a safe way, so that it's out of the hands of competitors, and you use an independent third party, what can you do with that information? Do you feed that information back to the members then and let the members decide what the benchmark should be? Do you then share that information with the JSE and ask the JSE to make a decision? Do you, like Ferdi suggested, maybe look at some other objective, indices or benchmarks that's perhaps better suited to storage costs? And there are a number of these debates. There's obviously some debate around what exactly comprises the storage costs versus handling costs. So all of these nuances make it extremely difficult to collate cost information and other information which is competitively sensitive. Taking into account that if you do collate cost information and you know the pricing, say for example, you know the SAPEX storage rate, you may then be able to calculate what the profit margin is at a particular silo or across various silos. So the purpose for which you need that information is obviously important. The other important consideration is that the Competition Commission guidelines on information sharing between competitors lists a number of factors which one must take into account. One of the factors is obviously that one should only collate such information which is indispensable for the achievement of the purpose. So assuming that the purpose is pro-competitive, right, you want to ensure the sustainability of a particular industry, you want to prevent the decline in productive capacity in a particular industry, one must take into account that you shouldn't be collating or asking for more information than you absolutely need in order to achieve that pro-competitive purpose. So it is a bit of a minefield, and ideally one wants to steer clear of delving into competitively sensitive information if one can avoid it. But there are ways in which one can begin that discussion as to how one can do it safely.
So just to and this part of the conversation, Dominique, although there's challenges, there is the ability to achieve a analysis of costing and trying to get it more towards a market-related environment. It is possible. It is not that it is impossible. It is possible, but it needs to build a strong case.
Yeah, exactly, Theo. So I'm one of those that believe that anything is possible, but there's a particular way in which one must go about it. And obviously, to do so lawfully, one must do that within the confines of the legislation which is relevant to this debate. Whether it's PPIA, whether it's competition, whatever it is. Something just also to bear in mind is the Competition Commission does consider exemptions of certain practices or certain agreements between competitors in terms of Section 10 of the Competition Act. It's called an exemption. The important thing to remember if one is inclined to apply to the Competition Commission for an exemption, say, for example, because you want to exempt this practice of collating cost information for purposes of perhaps engaging with the JSE or whatever it is, that exemption is not an ex post facto approval. So one's got to, in advance of engaging in the benchmarking or any agreements or coordination between competitors, one's got to in advance apply for the exemption, demonstrate why the exemption is required. So there's certain objectives identified in the Competition Act, which if you meet those objectives, the Commission would be inclined to look at granting exemption for a certain period of time. So what is important is that there is a process one could follow if one wants to err on the side of caution, but you've got to do that before you've implemented any practice. It's not after the fact. Once you've engaged in the exchange of competitively sensitive information, which could lead to a prohibition, then it's far too late. You can't then ask for forgiveness. So that's just important to remember.
Thank you. What for me is, Tom, and I'm going to ask your comment, what is for me strange in this discussion is we come from a regulated agriculture environment, and all of a sudden it seems that the environment, if it comes to capital and investment, is again within a constraint, moving away from the free market. Again, it's moving towards certain elements that are unfortunately hamstrung the free market to operate. Your view, Tom?
Yes, thank you, Theo. My view is that we were in a controlled environment in the past with the marketing boards, and it worked in a certain sense, and then we demolished those boards and we come to a free market. But to get a free price discovery, there's certain rules that Vuyo explained that we need to actually make a free market or a future market actually work. So yes, it's still controlled, but it's a free market. And now it's certain elements is controlled. And yeah, I think every storage operator can actually charge whatever he wants to charge. It's not necessarily he had to charge the JSE rate. But unfortunately, the JSE rate set the bench, because everybody can either choose to store its grain on a JSE certificate, or you can store it at the storage operator rate. Now, for instance, only 25% of what actually is produced in South Africa get to physical delivery on the JSE. So it's a small percentage. But a lot of the owners of stock actually finance their stocks with financiers, and then they ask for a JSE certificate to make it tradable. The storage operator got their own certificates, and then there's a JSE certificate. So everybody go to the JSE certificate. So if my cost, for instance, is higher than what the JSE certificate is, the free market will go to the JSE certificate, and then they will issue the certificate, ask for the certificate, which is based on the JSE's rules or its cost structure, and then they later on, I don't know if they're going to deliver it on the stock exchange, or they're going to come back to me and say they just want to outload it, or they sell it into the market. At the end of the day, you don't know how many times that certificate was traded, or was it actually somewhere a delivery in the system or not. So at the end of the day, if I get a JSE certificate back, I have to charge the maximum storage account amount that the JSE subscribe. So at the end of the day, it becomes the bench. And if my rate is higher than a JSE, they will go for a JSE certificate. So at the end of the day, it makes it a bit of control. And it's not necessarily that we want to control it, but by setting that rules and the market working in that way, it becomes the benchmark, and that's the problem.
And the key here is just that the JSE didn't set that cost. It was the industry gave it to the JSE.
Yeah, I think when you look at the history, that in the beginning, when we started out as a free market, the JSE or SAFEX in those days asked the industry what your proposal the cost structure should be. And we went forward as an industry and we give it to them. But that was against the Competition Commission rules, and they fined us for that. So we paid the fines for that. So we couldn't actually, they said it should be an independent study. And not coming out of our own account. So at the end of the day, we sit with the problem, like what Dominique said, you have to do it by the right rules to actually set the rate. But now we see from when the free market started in 95 or 96, or SAFEX I think was started in 98, on that beginning, we were in par with what, say, rates would be in the world, say, for instance, the USA. Going over the time, we fall behind.
We've fallen behind international rates.
Yeah, we fall behind international rates, and we fall behind against our own cost. So our cost increase in the industry was actually higher than what the increase that the JSE actually allowed over time. And then we're sitting with a dilemma at the moment with, we are at this part at the moment. We don't get the return on investment, so there's no new investment, and then the whole sustainability comes into place. Because sustainability is about the age of the structures, the increase in the volumes that is actually produced. So the last investment that was made over the last couple of years was more in silo bags and bunkers, and not fixed structures. And we need the fixed structures actually for the long-term storage.
And also those fixed structures were built on producing as of 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah, where the maize or the grains is produced, that also shift over years. So not necessarily all of that structure is built in the right places. And you can't actually move it. We'd like to move it, but we can't move it. So now it's a short-term solution that is actually out there. And then going into to the next discussions in the next couple of days, it all comes down to there's a need from the industry to outload at a faster rate. Now, our structures was built to all deliver by road and dispatch by rail. Now, our rail system is collapsing at the moment. I don't think 10% of the grain that is actually produced is actually transported by rail these days. So the pressure on the structure is now we have to receive and outload by road. We have to make the free market work, so there must be, people have to have access in a certain amount of time to their stock. And if they don't have access to the stock, they say the market, the price mechanism doesn't really reflect what the actual storage time is. And at the end of the day, so there's pressure on the system to increase that outloading capacity. So there's also investment that is needed. So there's investment in structures and there's investment in equipment at the end of the day that is needed. And if there's not a return, then somewhere we're going to have sustainability problems.
Any questions at this point in time? You can post questions online. I'm sitting with an iPad. If there's any questions online, you're welcome to post them. Any questions from people in the audience here at this point? Any questions? Yes, Ru. You can press, that's the rule. Okay.
Does the industry see the increase in silo bags and bunkers as a barrier to investment on top of all the other issues that's been mentioned? Because obviously there must be a case for investment or need for increased capacity. So, and I think that's probably my question. Comment is, what's important for us to understand as financiers that's active in the industry is also that there's a difference between volume creation, capacity, where you actually have to create more on what there is at the moment, and the actual investment to be more efficient. I wonder if that's a dynamic to look at as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask first Francois and then Tom. The question there, I think, is important in the sense of we're talking about long-term infrastructure, and where does the silo bag fit into, or the other storage options fit into this?
I actually want to stir the pot a little bit more, Theo. So first, direct answer to your question. There's about 30 million tons of storage space in South Africa. 30 million tons. If you look at the last season, both the summer and the winter crops, roughly 22 million tons of production. So obviously enough. Is it at the right place? Is it at the right cost? Those are all questions.
So just to unpack, so 30 million capacity, 22 million delivered. So there is capacity. All right.
More directly to Ruth's question, what happened the last few years? No permanent storage, very little permanent storage cost delivered. So, or storage space built, and almost all of the alternative storage were implemented, which says to you that there is a place for a mix of these storage to get to the right market mix and the right price mix. But let me just explore something else with you in the pricing. We're talking about storage and handling cost. So first of all, how do we compare with the rest of the world? What's that benchmark? The benchmark internationally is that cost is about 10% of the commodity price.
So just, we're going to talk numbers now, and I'm going to clarify so that everybody's on the same page. Yep. Internationally, the benchmark is about 10% of the commodity price.
So I looked at it for the last 12 to 14 years. That cost in South Africa is between 4 and 6%, so clearly below the international market. Now,
half the international market, actually 50%.
Yes. So clearly, the debate about SAFEX and the SAFEX tariff has some importance. I don't think we have to talk about the standardized rate. There has to be a standardized rate to have the future market do its work. But there's a lot of other things. Now, let me just explore something else in the free market. So there's Checker stores right across the nation. And there's obviously loss leaders. Say, for instance, a bag of 1 kilogram sugar is a lost leader, and that promotion is run, and it's the same price everywhere. But the rest of your offering, is it the same price at every store? Never. It cannot be. And the profitability of each Checker store right across the nation isn't the same. There's loss-making stores, and they will be closed. So let's think about the other elements, in the price formation and how that price is formed. Now, surely when it comes to food and food security, you have to be very careful how you implement the free market. But usually the free market sorts itself out over time. Either underpricing, no investment. Overpricing, market share loss. So usually that balances out. So the Checkers in Uppington competes with the Woolworths at the Pick n Pay and whatever on a specific trolley of products. So my issue is that, if we allow the rest of the market to sort that out over time, maybe we should also explore that.
I'm going to bring the conversation to the value chain and where does that move capital around in the value chain. But Tom, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, thank you. For me, it is, look at what Francis said, the value of the product increases over time. So we know prices increased over time. One of our bigger costs is insurance cost. And to come back to Ruth's question, you as a bank or the financier would like the storage operator to keep the product in a good condition over a long period of time. As production increases, we obviously will store longer periods. All depends on the export program and how efficient the harbors and the railway system is working, how much we can export. But at the end of the day, our production is increasing. We want the sustainable and the good value because we're talking about food here, and we want to keep it in a good order. So the short-term storage has a place, but you also need long-term storage and get the value of that. With that, the increase of the price and the increase of insurance cost. So to make sure that we can supply the market with a product over time, we have to insure it. So as prices increase, our costs increase with that. And so there is a mix that you need in these structures, and the free market will sort that out. But by getting to the end of the lifetime of our fixed structures, it's a problem that we have to address, and that's why we're talking about sustainability and return on investment. And then obviously the increase in the needs of the market. The market needs segregation. They want traceability. And the whole world are moving towards traceability. So there's an increased demand for segregation, which the bags help and the bunkers in a less extent help. But at the end of the day, the market pulls for a certain, asks for a certain, there needs to be investment in that. And yes, I think we as an industry definitely can differ our offer. And we can look at the baskets of things that we offer, like Francois said, that we actually make our income streams more sustainable at the end of the day. But working with a product that is actually the staple of South Africa, which is the cheapest staple food in South Africa, you must also, there's pressure on that, cost increases and things like that. So to find this equilibrium or to get to it's a challenge.
Ferdi, your view on the role of long-term infrastructure and the investment in infrastructure versus short-term and almost the making this or playing in the gap of short-term requirements. What's your view on that?
Yeah, maybe a quick one. I think the one that we can add is obviously a lot of on-farm storage has also happened over the last, let's say we're now, 25 years into the free market. So a lot of on-farm storage. Two, I think it's a completely different environment to a large extent. And it almost feels to me like listening to the discussions, we had an inflection point of, over the years, what we had, about 18 million tons of cement silos. I think 20, yeah, right? By the time with the deregulation came, we had about 20 million tons, and now sitting at 30 million, and the gap was filled by this, by the more, let's say, the bunkers, the silo bags, which are obviously cannot fulfill all the requirements that the market needs. And we are getting towards the end of the lifespan. So kind of
end of the lifespan of the long-term cement infrastructure.
Let's call them cement, or the permanent structures, the ones that can actually deliver on very specific requirements that the market needs, whether this is in terms of food quality, the longer term storage facilities, or in terms of international, some of the export elements. But there's a mixed bag of it. The long story short, maybe I'll give you a practical example. We're currently doing work in Malawi, so that's what we don't want, and we just need to fix and fine tune what we have on this side, because there in Malawi, if we talk about storage and long-term storage, the World Bank also had this wonderful idea of they just need to put down silos. And they are literally, we've been at those sites, 20,000 ton big silos, cement silos standing there, nobody uses it. And it comes back to the business model and private sector, the importance of private sector. So in Malawi, we know the model there, it's government regulated, it's food security, so they've got all these FRA, food reserve agencies, they manipulate prices, they put export bans in place, it's a political, it's a tool that they use. So if you have, and that's the extreme, so just coming back to the South African, what we have here, we need this price, this regulated, the costs. We need some regulation, but it needs to be put in place in such a way that private sector can move. And I think that's what we're at this point where the regulation is required. Francois, like you're saying, we understand we need that one benchmark for the futures market to operate. But we're saying that benchmark is now, we've come to a stage where that benchmark is limiting the investment in these longer term facilities. And that's the problem. So we've had the private sector moving into the space of the less permanent structures or the bunkers, the quicker ones. And they've done a fantastic job. I think they've made our market extremely competitive and absorbed a lot of the additional volumes, additional throughput. If we think about the difference of trading, we have big companies now, traders who are literally doing plow slide. They're loading on the farm, bringing either to the processors, to the mills, and I think it's a completely different environment. But clearly, here's a need for some adjustments in terms of what South Africa Incorporated needs for longer term investments. And government shouldn't do those investments, but government should put in place, we should refine the regulations for private sector to move in those longer term investments.
I just want to come back. So you say in Malawi, so the answer is not purely to put down cement silos. Malawi showed you that is, the solution is not purely to build a silo.
Correct. If you don't have a private sector who operates that in a profitable way and make sure that it's in place, it's well kept, it's at the right location, is also a big issue. So that's, part of those 20 million ton silos are sitting in places. Our production patterns have changed here. We've lost about 1 million hectares of land towards the west of the country. Some of it is going a little bit in and out. We will always say about 200,000 tons, but you can be safe that there are silos, and colleagues in the room will know where those silos sit. They are not well placed. So production patterns are changing, climate is changing, our export routes are changing. But I think in short, we're already at a very crucial inflection point in the industry in terms of competitiveness internationally, and that links to our export markets, but also in terms of import replacement or cost of food. I'll give you a practical quick one, just on sunflower, a study that we recently did on oil content on sunflower seed. We are struggling to compete internationally with imported vegetable oil. So there's a lot of work done. We have sunflower seed that can produce higher oil content, but there's additional functionality that's required at the silo operators to do the split, to measure the oil content, to do the splitting of this. This is high oil content sunflower oil. Producers could even get a premium for it because in the crushing margin there's money to make and we can become more competitive. But that functionality at the silo and storage level costs money.
It costs investment.
It costs investment. So if we don't get that investment, if there's not an incentive, we cannot compete, we can't push out more imports. And we could do it, and it could be a trickle-down effect for the total value chain. But if that incentive is not there, we're not going to see it.
Before I get to the whole value chain and where capital is moving, just a question that Ferdi noted about the inflection point. And Tom and Francois, I'm going to specifically ask your comments on that. The lifespan or life of a cement silo and the maintenance, where does it fit into it? Where are those from a timing, cost, efficiency? Where's that?
So if you don't reinvest, if you don't maintain any asset, so the lifespan obviously is shorter. That's the first thing. So in many cases, some of these assets were overly sweated and impairs their lifetime. If you properly maintain and keep on, investing back into just the initial capacity, that's one thing. Then secondly, to up your investment in silos. We did it to look at how can we invest and change that investment. For instance, to accept higher moisture content, to increase the intake speed. In other words, if you just look at the logistical chain, a link costs you 6,000 rands a day, whether you turn it once or you turn it 5 times. So obviously, if your intake speed at the silo is increased, you can turn it and your cost per ton drastically comes down. So that is why, investment calls for thinking out of the box, reinvesting. And by that, you can increase the usability and the lifespan of your silos. Obviously, some of our silos, as Ferdi said, to the western part and to the southern part, production has shifted.
So the silo is unfortunately at the wrong place.
It's in the wrong place. And the sooner you cut your cost closer down and get rid of it, the better you can use the rest of your fleet of investments. And then also get the mix right. But I come back to my point. If you do not apply the rules of capital, you will find yourself in some predicament at some point. The judge is waiting for you down the line.
Tom?
Theo, you look at the fixed structures or concrete structures, you got the building and you got the equipment. The building, the life depends on how good it was built in the beginning. It's 50, 60 years or maybe longer. So there is those structures that is, even if it's old, the building is still, or the bin is still in a good condition. It all comes down to the equipment. The speed of the equipment and what the equipment is actually doing. So it's the intake speed and the outloading speed. Like I said previously, we were built initially to intake by road and outload by rail. Now everything is rail. So there's a pressure on the system on the roadside, and I think there's you have to increase your capability to take it at a higher rate intake, so that the farmer doesn't stand in a row. So like you said, the truck has to turn around and everybody have to quick. And that's why some of the on-farm storage was built, to buffer that. People build on-farm storage so that they can harvest quickly and then deliver to a off-take or a manufacturer, or actually to the silos as well, to store it there. So the equipment is a big thing, and that lifetime of that equipment, it all comes down to, say, 10, 15 years. And if you maintain it well, it's a constant maintenance program. You are actually spending every year on that to keep it up.
I'm going to ask another round of questions. Any questions from the audience or online? Francois, if clearly there's a challenge in terms of the return on capital and the risk involved here. I want to broaden the discussion. If you take it from the farmer to the consumer, and margin and capital move in that chain, it moves around continuously. So if the return is not in the silo infrastructure, where does that margin move to and where does capital move to?
So that's an interesting question. It's value chains and where the margin lies in value chains. And let me just first of all say, if you do not do the analysis and you depend on perceptions, I can guarantee you 95% of the times you're wrong. A general perception that's a toxic assumption. So, for instance, an easy thing to say is the value lies at the end of the value chain. The best return is at the end of the value chain. It is clinically, analytically, it is wrong.
That's a very, very popular view to express, and the one we always hear is about the wine bottle, that the waiter gets more than the farmer kind of thing.
So if you can draw out any value chain and you mark all companies within that value chain and you take their financial results over years, then surely, not on profitability, but on the basis of reaching alpha and creating alpha, where is the best alpha in that value chain? What you think usually is wrong. It's not at the end. It usually is within the value chains. If you do that analysis, it's more to the middle of it, over a long term. So that's an important thing to remember. You might say there's a higher margin at the end, but the investment is higher. So, if you want to get into that competitive space, you'll find out that what is relevant there. But I think if you look at the investment through the value chains, obviously, and this is the question, if production, let's take the maize value chain, if production has moved from Randfontein to the production areas, which indeed it has. So why then should there be still a discount in pricing at that production point relative to Randfontein? Obviously that cannot be, because the production is there, it sources its product right around the silo. So my point is, if you then gauge those margins, I think the distribution of the profitability along the value chain, there's something seriously wrong. And I just look at the investment. If a huge investment, a permanent structure investment, is made in the rural area next to a production facility, you must ask yourself, what's the margins like, in that further processing, and why can they afford something, and that something costs you 80 to 100 million rand, and others in the value chain can't? It must surely raise a question.
And that must raise a question in terms of capital and yield.
So, to be very direct, I think farmers in certain areas are shortchanged. They're not paid the fair share of what they should. If there's a production facility in that specific area and there's an oversupply of product there, obviously the price has to be factored in. And not only, they shouldn't just pay a little bit more than a storer. That cannot be, because there's margin in the production as well. Relative to that, you should paid so that the margin is evenly distributed through that value chain.
but
Otherwise, production will just cease to exist.
But in a complete free market, the market will sort that out.
Definitely over time it will. So to over-interfere in markets has the opposite. You spoke about Malawi. That's an over-interference. And what happens? Malawi is not food secure. They are food insecure. And the pricing is totally out of kilter.
Ferdy, yes.
Just on what Francois said now, I believe in the free market and that the free market will sort it out. If there's overproduction in the area, prices will be under pressure. And if a manufacturer will see an opportunity to put up a facility in that space, he will, for a certain amount of time, he will have an advantage. But at the end of the day, that will also be sorted out by the market. Because if the consumption increase, then the price will of the overproduction will come. And if there is actually overproduction, it means that that production in that area, based to where the offtake are situated currently, that is a disparity. And that's why there's a discount or not a premium. And then the discounts and the premium in the market sort that out in a certain way. So yes, for the JSE, there's differentials that is but around the differential system, the free market actually developed, and there's premiums and discounts paid according to what the production in that specific areas are.
Theo, can I maybe just add to that? So I think the evolution of the soybean industry, the last 5 years, is a very good example.
Yeah.
Well, we can look a little bit further back, let's say 10 years, and we can see there was this, there was this clear opportunity in the market. We were starting to produce a surplus of beans at export parity. You'll remember that time when we had meal and veggie oils at import parity, beans at export parity. That's a healthy crushing margin. And then we had the sudden investment in crushing facilities. Then those crushing facilities were only running at 50-60%. We had a shortfall of beans. So beans ran almost up to import parity again, and the product was at import parity. And now what we've seen in the last 2 seasons, beans starting to drop away, we are hitting surpluses again, and now we're starting to export beans, and we've got beans back at export parity, and you start to see those discounts coming through on the meal. Now it comes back to this investment, and obviously these are some of these are sensitive or very current debates. Where's going to be the next crushing plant for soybeans? Because we have a big expansion in the west of soybean hectares, which we didn't have that in the past. So we're talking about hectares in the west going away and some of the far west, but we're seeing a lot more soybean production in the west. That's not where the crushing plants are. Crushing plants are all in the east and central. So the question will be now, if that holds, so obviously there are margins to make. And the moment that investment is triggered, capital will have to flow, and then we'll have to see how the market adjusts. I just want to say that in South Africa, and we can really, we need to protect and be sure and foster what we already have in terms of information systems. SAGES is extremely valuable. Information that goes out, the S&D committee is extremely valuable. Accurate crop estimates, extremely valuable. So to at least help, and Francois, that at least, I think there's a short change opportunity always in the market. But I think if we work hard in maintaining our information systems, having those transparent and have people access to those information systems, I think what we need to do is fine tune, and the silo index feels to me it's like an opportunity for fine tuning. In terms of not throwing it all out, and I think that's not what we're saying, is saying there's opportunity for fine tuning, and there's a very real reason that a fine tuning is required or rethinking is required.
Vuyo, your comments on what have been said so far?
Sure, it's a very tricky and a difficult question to answer, but I think from a JSE perspective, I think from what I've heard, I think it all boils down to the business model that each individual storage operator operates on. And I think looking at short-term storage capacity, I think the reason why we have these kind of structures, again, it's to actually assist the market in terms of when clients want access to the product much quicker, to go directly to the mill or for export points. But then I think for the traditional old silos, which requires a lot of capital allocation or capital investment, I think then it all boils down to say, okay, do I actually want to actually put up more equipment to actually have a quicker output in terms of the product going out of the silo? Is it in the right location and all that? So I think the decision lies with the individual storage operators. And I think in terms of the index, yes, I think in my view, yes, we're not saying as a JSE it should not be done. It should be done, but then it needs to come from the individual storage operators. Then I think as a JSE we'll take it on forward. Again, we'll review and assess everything, and then it needs to go out for an extensive market consultation, basically. So that's just the basics of it.
But from a point of departure, it needs to come from the industry.
100%.
And we all agree on that.
But I think there's sufficient structures that facilitates that currently. So there's advice committees, and that can be further explored. But I think there's sufficient structures. I agree with Ferdi. We have an excellent and a functional price-forming mechanism. Remember, there's also other issues that we haven't spoken about. So there's price discovery, and then there's infrastructure, which clearly, is a huge problem, because rail is just supposed to be much cheaper than road, and if that falls away, your whole production system, the cost rises in that. And it's not only that. So it's energy, it's connectivity, it's the whole challenge that each of these individuals that's on this call today and in their businesses experience on a daily basis. I mean, from an investment point of view, decisions that business people make these days are defensive. It's not offensive. You're trying to protect. You're trying
what you've got.
Yeah, and that can never be internationally competitive.
All right. I see. Is there any other? Roo, yes. Question from your side. Thank you.
Thanks to you. Getting back to my earlier question, right? So, and I think, Ferdi, you mentioned it. There's a bit of an inflection point. How do the permanent storers change their business models to reflect the new reality? I think you said it, Ferdi. There's a new environment, and for banks, and let me say this: it's in our interest that there is price discovery, that there is standardization, that a ton of maize or soy or wheat is worth X amount of money at a certain. So there's a lot of value in that, but there's also a contradiction because the market there's a substantial portion of grains that are stored in the temporary structures. So if the return in permanent structures, cement structures, are not sufficient to justify further investment in cement structures, what other investment avenues or structure avenues can the permanent storers look at? Because farmers don't want to pay more, they want to pay less. Consumer doesn't want to pay more, he wants to pay less. And farmers are looking continuously, I think some of them, and I think it's getting big enough to become a factor, to look how you can disaggregate the storers, the traders, the handlers of their produce in the quest to achieve better margins. For me, it seems that business models need to change to an extent to allow for almost a dualistic system, and I suppose that's the challenge there is.
That's a very interesting question. So perhaps what we do with that question is just give a few comments, then we break, and then I want to delve deeper into that. But initial comments, Francois?
So let me answer it in another way. Are all banks, commercial banks, equally profitable? Surely not. Are all retailers, are all storers of grain equally profitable? No. So where does it start? It always starts at your strategy, to have a clear strategy, to know why you're doing things. And then, according to that, inflects your business model. So for instance, if you do not invest in assets, which you think strategically is your core assets, how the hell are you going to keep on getting better returns? So that's part of what Vuyu is referring to. So in some cases where things went wrong, if you go back, then allocation of capital were done wrong. There were a wrong strategy. For instance, people said, well, let's invest in the whole value chain. Did those businesses survive? The history says no.
That's why there is consolidation in the market, to put this together and get a better average in cost. That's consolidation. And then on the other hand, to invest in whatever is available to invest. So we're not, I think the original storage owners are not only fixed structures anymore. They are the bunkers and the silo bags. We all go into the whole spectrum of storage.
And it's part of your portfolio.
And it's part of your portfolio. And then you offer, so you've got short-term storage that you can actually turn quickly, and then you've got the long-term storage, makes you more flexible in certain ways. So the business models, you adapt to what it was in the past, but you have to look forward. How are you going to change it?
I'm going to take that point further. So I see we are now at the time where we can take a little break. It is now almost 20 past 10. Can we come back at 10:30? So take a 10-minute break, and then I'm going to continue the discussion and picking up from your question, Ru, and take that further. So for the next 10 minutes, stretch your legs. Can we try to be back at 10:30 sharp? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for everybody. We are after the break and the second half of the discussion. The key discussion today is about the sustainability of the storage structure and the return on investment. And in the second session, I want to move more towards solutions, but also we've talked about the cost element side, the investment element side, but a bit about the income side, and just talk about that element. But Ferdi, I'm going to start with you. The comment or the question from Ru's side before the break, and we've started to talk about that, is about the different options of storage. And what is your point from analysis from a person looking at it from the outside? What's your point?
Yeah, I think in short, Ru, the companies have already adjusted. They've already, if you say, let's say at least 1/3 of our storage is now in a semi-permanent or non-permanent, like a silo bag or bunker. So companies have already moved. We've seen that gap. And there are also new players, obviously, in the market who don't have permanent structures, but only have the bunker silo. So I think we've seen that move quickly. It was fortunate in the sense that we have those options, because unfortunately, those investments had to be made in certain places because our rail does not run anymore. So the fact that Transnet has collapsed in terms of rail transport of grain has shaped some of the sites and the location, and has probably fueled some of these opportunities. And it comes back to opportunities because some lines, I think the fact that it just pushed up all the costs, and there were margins to make by investing in certain locations. So I think overall I would say we've seen that move. The question is now, what happens to the 2/3 of the permanent structures which are required in our food system at large? And I think that's a debate, or maybe the narrowing down this whole debate around it's that part of the storage system or that we're talking about in my mind.
So You want to say something?
No, so we've already started. So we've already started with, doing or reinvesting and maintaining. So that obviously gives you flexibility. But if you talk about the rest of the value chain, so let me pose this question: if you store for exactly the same time maize in the different storage types, and you then ask the miller to mill it, is his extraction of those products exactly the same, or does it differ? Because if you listen to the miller, and the processor, other things matters to him. First of all, is extraction is crucially important. 0.5% of extraction, that's between a profit and a loss. Color differentiation. Other things like moisture content. Things like a super top grade, which you can, through segregation. So there's specific metrics that apply for, say, a grade 1. But say if you can intersplit it, would the miller be prepared to pay more for that? Now you're talking about the rest of the value chain and enhancing and adding value. So we haven't touched on that.
Can our storage capacity do that?
Yes, to a limited amount. So if you have 30 million tons of capacity, and the more segregation you do, the less that 30,000 ton means. Because what you now sit is with bins that's either a quarter or half full. So you cannot fully, make use of that. So that ratio of 22 million tons produced, 30 million tons available, and the overlap between winter and summer, the fact that there's imports that slows down the milling rate, the comparative energy cost between different foodstuffs, all of that comes to play. And that's where your business model has to be extremely flexible. You have to be wide awake to understand what trends is happening, what the future holds, and a privateer then has to adjust his business model. It then comes back to, what's the risk in your, how do you invest? So I'm making the point, and I'm backing up for you. So there's the JSE is important, and that it works. So we will always, there will always be a debate about that. But we shouldn't break a fully functional value system. We should refine it, and I keep making my point. If you adhere to the rules of the free market, in the long term, Mr. Market is right. It sorts out the underlying
inefficiencies.
And inefficiencies.
I think the problem we sit with at the moment in the current structure is there's a ceiling, there's a actual top. So in a free market, say for instance, what is a fair value of storage? And we said from the beginning, looking at what the bench of in the international market, as we are below. So our bench or our ceiling is lower. So setting a ceiling a bit higher, who's going to pay for that? And what Francois said now, doing all the segregation, there's inefficiencies by storing. You can't utilize your storage facilities. Who's going to pay for that in inefficiencies? Is there in the market enough money in the chain to pay for that inefficiency to develop that service? So what I suggest is, if we got a fair value on storage, and obviously we can't charge more than that because that's the ceiling. And for all the reasons we said here, that's going to probably stay the same. So to set the value there, but I think the free market will sort out, because if it's too high, then there will be other investment coming in.
Additional capital will come in.
Yeah, and so then any company can charge less than that. But currently being at the bottom, nobody can charge less because that's not you actually cutting in your costs. So to set the right storage level there, and I think out of that the free market will actually make it, if it's possible, in certain areas there can be a lower storage rate, then, and it can be a differentiated
So we're
storage
talking
rate.
about refining.
Yeah.
And changing business models to adapt. I've got a few questions. I'm going to go through these. You want to say something?
Can I maybe just add something to that too? So, or maybe are we going to talk about costs and kind of the value chain and the income and the costs? So just to make, because a farmer would argue, and Francois, I think it alludes to your original point around farmers and the area. If we refine this model, obviously we need to consider, so these costs are going up. Tom, your argument is, there will be opportunity for, if there are players out there that can do it more competitively than your benchmark, they should get the benefit and they'll pull the volumes, isn't it? They'll get bigger throughput in their system. So there's at least that hedge. Because farmers could argue, the way that just like we're comparing, saying now, we are not on an international standard. Our storage costs are, as a percentage share of maize, is lower than international. Farmers, we do the benchmarking on cost of production. Our fertilizer and our cost of production are more expensive than the US. So who in the chain is going to absorb the costs? Tom, and that's a tricky question. Yes. Because farmers, we do that benchmarking over many years we've done it, and we know we're always trying to push down the costs per ton of maize produced. But the raw material that comes in is our fertilizer is more expensive than a typical American farmer. So these benchmarks are difficult. You'll have to make them throughout the value chain almost.
Different, but now you move into almost you're putting regulatory elements into it in a strange way. You're moving away from a free market in a strange way.
Yeah, correct. So I mean, there's a free market, and then you need the ingredients. It's just a rugby game. You have the players on the field, and you need to set the rules. And there are some that can interpret the rules or can play with the rules as long as those rules are fair for all the players to engage and be on the field. That's a fair game. But if a certain rule limits certain movements of your, let's say, what your fly half can do or not can do, and you need a fly half for a certain game, you need to adjust the rule. So maybe not a good example, but at least so we have a regulated component that's required for the free market to operate.
Yeah, Theo,
I want to just move the discussion towards, we've talked about the cost, input, yield, but the other side of the income statement. Let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so there's lots of ways to enhance that. So I just touched on the extraction that your product gives, the segregation that you give. Color in a South African context, the color of the product is extremely important. So those are all, let's call it value adding and enhancing models that we still have to and can play with. So it's not only the cost. Overall, I would, and there's a lot of things that impact. We touched on some of that, that impacts on the final price formation. I would caution against state interference. More regulation, usually, and it gives us, you can go and look at the rest of Africa, you can go and look at certain areas in the world where regulation were overstimulated. It led to decay and insecurity. So the free market works. Sorry.
But the point there is, then you're in an environment of food security. So you need to balance the two. You need a common good with the free market.
But let's take your point, Theo. So if you talk about food security, who's supposed to secure food for the nation? Must it only be the maize farmers? They cannot bear the brunt of food security. They're free marketers, they're entrepreneurs. If you look at the energy cost, just segregate all the energy products and you look at the cost per kilojoule produced, maize meal is, and let me give you the range so that you understand what that difference is. Between the cheapest and the most expensive, you can feed somebody, you can give him 80%, 80% of their daily use or their need of energy at roughly about 350 to 4 rand per day. The most expensive is 35 rand a day. So, why must only the maize farmer then be the guy who subsidizes food security in the whole chain? And let me give you that example. So 2-minute noodles, if you give somebody 80% of their daily use of energy, their need of energy, it will cost you 35 rand per person. Maize meal will cost you 3 rand. So if we talk about food security, why must the maize farmers carry that? Or the maize value chain, for that instance, carry that? Surely the consumer will say, well, I will choose what to buy, where, when, and at what price. But then you must allow the free market to work. You shouldn't impair the storage of maize, but the storage of whatever the other products is an unregulated. Potatoes is also an energy. Is it regulated? The market? Zero. A farmer decides where to shift his product to and when, at what price and when.
But currently the storage is not regulated in our
Certain
environment.
parts of it, yeah.
Yeah. So we don't want to regulate the price. We just make the bench fair price and say trade within that range. If that bench is below cost, then it is not work. The sustainability is not there. If it's above, then there's room to trade within the spectrum. So that is something we must consider. But the other thing is, how do you set that rate? So we trade a discovery on price discovery on maize as a product. We do basis trading on transport and premiums, basis trading. Is there a case to be made to trade storage cost?
For you?
That's a very good question by Tom, but I think just to highlight, I think it's important to have some sort of a benchmark mechanism in South Africa to actually allow for the market to actually trade storage rates, because we will have to have some sort of like an underlying market that is liquid and vibrant to actually use that transactional data to settle whatever contracts that will trade on the JC. So that's important. I think it's worth trying it, but then we'll need a vibrant cash market to actually settle those contracts on the JC.
So what Vuyo is saying, and the question is, if we prohibit physical trading on SAFEX from tomorrow, what's going to happen? We say no physical trading.
Yeah, the market collapses because there is no benchmark set in the cash market where we can
so
actually
won't that develop within a very short time? Because there is an
because
active
of free
trading.
market.
Yes,
Correct.
there is an active
They
trading
will trading
market.
and you will
maybe
need to
not
report.
at the volumes.
Yeah.
But I mean the original
Somewhere you need price discovery.
Yeah.
the original reason why SAFEX developed was because for that future hedging.
Yeah.
And in part price
To
discovery.
create a marketplace
Yes.
for two people to trade.
So over time, it developed into a physical market. My question is, if we prohibit that from tomorrow, what will happen?
It's a difficult. The point is somewhere there'll be. We need, from a market point of view, we need price discovery and need certainty of rules around it. But yes, that will develop in itself. I think the point there is that we should rather fix what is there, because there is somewhere there's a supply and demand needs to come to the fore somewhere. Yeah. We've got 5 questions, so I would like to just go through these questions, and some of them we have answered up to a point. Some of them is quite technical. So the first question is, what is the view of processors such as millers on the optimum storage time of different storage structures. Do they give preference to stock in long-term storage, bracket cement structures, to short-term storage, silo bags, bunkers, etc.? And so therefore the question is there an impact on the quality of the product given where it was stored?
Without doubt. So, without doubt. If you leave a product in a cement, in a plastic bag out in the sun, it will definitely change.
So there is a differential,
yes,
in terms of quality.
It's not fully defined and marketed at this point, but if you talk individually to markets, they will tell you. And we get that these days. Millers will say, you must prove to me that this product comes from a concrete silo.
Not from a silo bag.
I don't want to have it. If it's fresh product, immediately produced, and we can mill it, then I'm okay. But if it was there for a period of time, I don't want it.
So there's not a price differential, they don't want it.
Yeah, within time frames, they use different structures. So they buy in that way. Within hours, they will do the farm loading and off the farm, and then it will change over time. But coming to the end of the season, they would like it out of a permanent structure.
If you have a premium brand, Theo, an absolute premium, top of the range brand, then they will defend that brand with everything they do. They need to have.
And this is a variable quality in that brand.
Yes, because they, at the retail level, they ask a premium for that. And they've built that brand over time. And they will not only, take any product from anywhere to defend that market premium that they have.
All right. The next question is linked to this. I'm not sure if anybody would like to add something. It's in Afrikaans, so I'm going to translate as we carry on. The risk of bunkers and silo bags is higher than the risk in permanent structures. To what extent is there a price differential for this risk or not at this point in time?
So that's a very interesting question, and it goes back to allocation of capital, which means that the rate that you should charge in a semi-permanent should be higher, because the risk is higher, the market premium is higher.
Yeah.
Now, again, I will say that brings equilibrium into the market. So why hasn't the market...
That moves toward your point of capital allocation.
Yes, why hasn't the market fully moved to semi-permanent storage? Because of that. So there'll be a point where it balances. And I think we're getting to that point where it's nearly balanced. And then the different brands will segregate themselves. They will source product from different areas. Remember, there's even within a permanent storage facility, if product comes from the east of the country or the west, it's a totally different product. So the free market will over time sort that out. Millers know where they have to source their product to lead to a certain premium product.
Something
yes.
else, the balance sheet behind that storage operator is obviously something that the banks will look at. So if you finance product in that storage facility for a longer time, your risk is higher. So there should be a different financing rate or whatever, because at the end of the day, that you can't store it that long in that. And if the balance sheet is behind that to guarantee the quality at the end, then the industry is fine with that. So as soon as there's not a balance sheet behind that storage, then
the commodities quality becomes more important.
Yeah.
There's another question, and I'm going to ask this to you, Ferdi. You noted about an inflection point. The question is, what does the future hold in terms of food security if we do not see investment in long-term storage structures? And then the follow-up on this is, will it catch up with us too late?
Yeah, so I think, I mentioned this inflection point, and obviously there's investment required. South African companies are extremely nimble in their business models and the way that they move around and make things work. But I think at this stage there are a combination of factors too that are really influencing the decision making of these companies. And Francois, I think you were alluding to it, saying it's almost like not being proactive. You're almost like protecting what you can at this stage. I think there will be new dynamics coming into the market, moving on what we currently have. Personally, and this food security argument, I agree with Francois. It is not the market. If we just compare countries in Africa that have tried to manipulate food security, it always ends up in some kind of a political economy for votes. We compared volatility of prices in Malawi. You know that it's fluctuating almost $300 a ton in one season, going from $90 to $400, because it's a function of over-regulation. So I think we're going to see it requires a fine-tuning of what we have, considering carefully, is there fine-tuning required in a certain regulation or a benchmark that we can refine on? But the private sector will adjust, and we'll see those adjustments. But there are bigger issues at play that we all need to work together on, like the infrastructure, our grain, our logistics, our ports. Those are elements that will affect all of us in a much, or already affecting all of us in a much, much bigger way. So those are the bigger concerns for me than this specific point. This is, I think we can fine-tune it. We shouldn't overplay it that food security is at risk in this debate. I think we're talking here about fine-tunements, not underplaying what the argument or the question is here, but not saying food security is at risk because we don't have storage facilities.
There's other reasons why food security is at risk.
Yes.
Yeah. I think there's enough product that food security is not a problem. Currently, and there's enough storage available. We are net exporting at the moment. Yeah. So where's the challenge? We want the production side to grow. If we look at the last years that Wessel showed us this morning, there was a double up in crop. We want to double up the crop again so that the farmers can actually earn foreign investment or foreign currency into the company, and it helps the total economy of South Africa. So we would like to increase production, and if there is no investment, obviously the exports and the production side will be limited in that way. It will be depressed. So there needs to be investment to actually keep up with the production, because we believe in our farmers and we believe in their capability to increase their efficiencies. And from a storage side, we also focus on how can we help the farmer to increase his efficiencies with the production side, but also with what the offering we give him, so that these efficiencies and his production can grow, because that is benefit all the whole of South Africa.
I want to move towards where should we look for solutions, and how should that solutions look from an operational point of view. Remember, or from an investment point of view. Remember, our topic is sustainability and return on investments, and these two goes hand in hand. And I just want to state what we said earlier: if there's not sufficient yield, capital will not follow. On two sides. Number one, new capacity, but also maintaining capacity. So let's start to look at where does this solution lie. Francois, from your perspective, being a capital allocator, where does these solutions lie and what should we focus on?
So you have to look at that holistically. Remember that anybody who has a business in South Africa has the choice to move that business to any other locality. So, and he will do it on international competitiveness. So I think the low-hanging fruits in South Africa now is energy. So we are energy deficient, and that is a huge, huge problem to every part of our economy. That if we don't fix that in the short term, business will flow out of South Africa, no doubt. They will move offshore to other localities. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is the infrastructure of our critical corridors. And there's 5, critical corridors in South Africa. Durban, Richards Bay, East London, Cape Town, and Saldanha Bay. We need to urgently fix those, and that speaks to rail, road, it speaks to pipelines, it speaks to, quayside investment, and. I think that's the second very important thing. I think the third thing is on criminality and this last. Let me just make that connection. If you don't regulate and organize and discipline society, if you allow criminal activity, then all the negative effects of that happens. And that, despite only, causing cost increases, when it gets to personal security or insecurity, people will move. So I think, and that's a political thing. We have this opportunity next year to change the political scene. So that is hugely important, that every voter should think carefully what is happening and how we could, through a political system, because clearly what is happening now, no South African can not agree that we're going down the hill. How do we change that? So I think those are the 3 important things that we have to, in the short term. The longer term is things like education and. But in the short term, the short-term gains are centered around those 3 issues.
If we then let's move I think we the fact that we talk about a technical enhancement here for food security, to bring it back, those are the major issues in terms of food security. But let's look at the principle of specifically this value chain and where the value chain is moving towards. Tom, where should we start to look for solutions in our value chain given the requirement for additional investment?
Yeah, if you look at specifically the value chain we're looking at the moment, if you look internally into South Africa, saying food in South Africa, then I think the competitiveness is high at the moment. But there's, like we addressed in the beginning, there's a cap on certain things. If we uncap that and change that a bit, then I think the free market will operate within that. New solutions will come forward. Like Ferry said, the company's got ability, our farmers got the ability to change over time. That makes us competitive. We are competitive in world terms in certain crops and certain products that we produce in South Africa. So to keep up that productivity, we actually keep to be innovative on how do we need the infrastructure. And I think, come back to what Francois said, we need the infrastructure, and we need the infrastructure to work. That's the beginning of it. And then we need the free market. The free market will sort out everything. If we're not competitive in South Africa against the world, we are globalized and we are producing in a global market, then I think imports is we can say we can import product, but it's not necessary. You can always import product. Yeah. We can rely that we will import. So that we have to produce it ourselves. And so for me it is, in the cost structure, we must be certain that we don't limit and chase capital away. If we got a certain, we must make sure that there is attractiveness in the industry, in the value chain, in any aspect of the value chain. And if we are not competitive, local, then we will import the food. But it's not necessary that it will be imported and it will be always available. So we have to fix that within South Africa. And there is amount of regulation within it, or state intervention where logistic or infrastructure is required.
There's a question here. If the PPI deter investments, now we've talked about the PPI and the level of PPI, not necessarily reflecting it, but the question is, if the PPI deter investments, what is the alternative solution for storage, for the storage sector going forward?
I think it is to first we have to decide what the level should be. So if we fall behind, the level of the storage
cost.
Storage cost. We fall behind, we said we're behind. So but from there onwards, there should be at least an increase or what the actual cost is. And that's what we said in the beginning. We should have a index that we develop ourselves on our costs at the end of the day that gives us a fair indication of what cost increases are. And it's not necessarily saying that cost increases are, it differs in parts of the country, it differs, so it's always going to be a generalized thing.
But now, I understand from the JSE's point of view, but certain silo complexes, certain companies run more efficient than others. So where does that leave you then?
So for me, if there is a fair benchmark, and say for instance, like Wessel said this morning, just for example, the storage rate are R1.07 at the moment. If it should be R1.35, then it's, but for me as a company, if I can operate below that, I will charge below that, and then people will store at that lowest rate. They always store at the lowest rate.
You will take margin.
I will still take margin. But if that margin, there's no margin and I'm below my cost because of a regulation or something like that, then there is a problem, a systemic problem. So we must make sure that firstly we set the rate right, and then the free market will operate within that. But surely we must make sure that keep up with trends in the market, and we must be able to adjust to things changing in the market. We can't, for 20 years, change or sit on something and not change, because
there's a question here that I'm going to loosely translate again. And I hope I understand the question correctly. We've noted when Wessel gave us the numbers that the storing, the rate currently is far below what we believe it should be. Currently, Tom and Francois, the fact that that rate is so far below, how do you guys address that? How do you work around that as companies that needs to return, make a return for shareholders? How do you manage that?
So that's one aspect, the SAFEX rate in the whole forming of price. That's one of the cost aspects. So what we do is we look at the income side, we look at the investment side. Let me just give you another example, Theo. So if a storage company decides, this is the rate that I ask, they normally do it throughout their whole silo complex. Same rate. It cannot be correct.
It cannot.
It cannot. So we've only started to scratch the surface. So I come back to my point. You look at capital allocation. If it doesn't work, you will be the one that's consolidated at the end.
Yeah.
Second thing is, you look at strategy, and you better differ your strategy if it doesn't work. There has to be a sane business strategy and not an emotional, cross-subsidized strategy. It does not work in the long term. So there's lots of ways that we are busy doing it and increase doing it.
But that doesn't mean one needs to make it as optimal as possible to allocate capital in this specific area. There's a long question here or a long comment with about 5 questions. So I'm going to read the whole comment. In your view, now I assume it's your view, but I don't think my view counts in this discussion. In your view, does producers underestimate the cost of managing stock stored on the farm? So that's the first question. The second question, what feedback do you get from producers that stores stock commercially on the farm? Are the playing field equal? Silos incur regulated costs to comply with regulatory requirements. The question implied here is, does the farm storage also comply with that? But suppliers direct from the farm to the processor does not comply. And then the last one is, these costs are different. Should everybody not comply to the same set of rules and regulations?
Yeah, the answer is yes, they should. What happens in South Africa, does it? No. I mean, you can take any example. The individuals who comply are policed. So SARS, if you comply, you can be sure that they'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Those outside the scope, the criminality aspect, unregulated, they can do whatever they want. They buy cash, they manipulate, so that's back to law and order in South Africa. That's a political thing. It has to be changed. If you do not understand that by now, South Africa is going down the drain. The system that is in place does not work. So we have to fix that at the political level. Then I can only look at what is happening. And Ferdi referred to that. Farmers usually, their own storage is used as a buffering capacity. If they want to do it on a long-term basis, I don't see that happening. They might at the offset think that they want to do it, but they quickly change their behavior. So it doesn't last. It's used as a buffering capacity, and there's a real merit in that. You know, harvesters, the capacity of a harvester keeps increasing. So just that says to you that if this is faster than other parts of the value chain, then you have to have buffering capacity.
Just quickly, I will bring Dominic. Dominic is still online, but when I've going to give Tom a chance, and then I'm going to start to talk about solutions, and then I'll bring Dominic back in again in terms of how does he view we move forward, specifically around the question where the Competition Commission and the fact that there's various players with a common interest involved here. But Tom, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just on the question, you can't generalize farmers and say farmers will burn their fingers by storing long term. But it is true, like what Francois said, they use it as a buffer, and where they store longer, they have to invest in other equipment to measure and make a bigger investment than just put up a silo. And once they've done that, they realize that there's much more than storage grain on a long term. And once they realize that, not everybody, but they tend not to do that. There is farmers that do store long term and do that the whole spectrum. But on general, I think the market is not going that way at the moment.
I'm going to just ask a quick comment here, another question, and we've kind of alluded to it, but I just want a thorough answer for it. Does financiers and insurance request the same compliance and requirements to get access to insurance on commodity and infrastructure on farm that is required from the commercial storage structure? So the question obviously was typed very quickly. So I'm just going to refine that. Or is it not the case? We've made the point now. We've made the point that there's a quality and risk issue involved. So being that, is there also therefore a pricing and requirement from financiers and insurance? Tom?
That's where insurance comes into play. So the financier will make sure that there is insurance for the quality or whatever, and then the premiums come in play towards the cost. But I don't think it is always the same. Like Francois said earlier, you can't generalize financiers. They got different policies, different on. So you can't say financing will be different. One company viewed a different risk profile than another company. So there is a difference in the market, but it's more difference between banks or financiers than it is within a specific finance.
Let's then, I'm going to allow another, we're slowly starting to move towards the end of the session. Any other questions from in the auditorium? Is there anybody with a question specifically? Yes, Yanni.
Thank you, Theo. I enjoy listening to this and not having to worry too much about how the solutions come. Just from my experience, when we've changed from a regulated era to the free market, there were certain things, especially around standards, that we had to negotiate within the free market, but negotiate, as you've learned from your Economics 101, there must be buyers and sellers. If you only have the silo people talking about this message, then surely, you know, it should be not R1.30, Tom, it should be R3.50 or something like that. But what we've learned in the free market, for instance, in the grading, there was a stress issue for the farmers, and they did some research. The market got together, like Francois said, there are some structures to sit down and talk this until you find a solution. It takes a lot longer than pushing buttons on the JSE and you find a buyer and a seller, you know, by bidding and offering. But I think, you know, we've done it with grading. I think when we've changed, the crop estimates, for instance, was always just done by the farmers and the silo people. And when we moved to a free market, we said, well, now we need some more independent people to crunch those numbers and to bring it out and just look at how successful we were. So I think, you know, there are structures. It's a difficult thing. Let's assume that. Let's do our homework on both sides of the market, and let's sit down like buyers and sellers and sort this out. I think, you know, everybody using the silo facilities understand there must be some silo facility. So my contribution would be, you know, use the structures that there are and discuss it and sort it out like we've done a lot of things. Please don't ask the government to help. Thank you.
Right.
I agree with that.
It comes back to that old saying that what is the most scariest sentence in the English language, from Ronald Reagan. And he said that the scariest sentence in the English language is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. but let's move away from that. I want to start to go. There's just one comment here from Marco Pretorius. He noted his name. So his comment is, this is comment and not a question. Operational cost carries a higher weighting than capital cost when it comes to grain storage. Operational cost versus capital cost is underestimated by the market. A big component of operational cost is security, stock control, and alternative energy that is as a result of where South Africa is today. This is, however, not the world norm and makes South Africa more expensive in this regard. Just a comment, and I think it's broadly in line specifically with what Francois said. Let's move specifically towards solutions, and I'm going to bring Dominique into the discussion. Dominique, your angle obviously is from a legal point of view, specifically from somebody with extensive knowledge when it comes to the industry talking to one another. You've listened to what was said, you've listened to some of the comments. Can you give us where you believe the industry should focus on and where they should be very careful not to go from your perspective, specifically as a lawyer specializing in competition commission issues?
Yeah, thanks, Theo. So just to say that I did listen quite carefully to all of the comments and the concerns that have been raised. Just before I get to the possible solutions and the way forward, I just wanted to make a few comments on what had been said. So first of all, from a lawyer's perspective, the JSE doesn't equate to government regulation. So when we talk about regulation or a benchmark, we're talking about a company who, as I understand the discussion, needed to have some certainty around storage costs, because at the end of the day, you needed, if you were buying a futures contract, you needed certainty as to what price you were paying for a particular mix, the grain, storage costs, where you could collect the grain and those sorts of things. So it's not government regulation in the sense of price controls or regulations issued under primary legislation. So participation in the JSE is obviously voluntary, and if I understood Voyo, he was saying that it's a maximum price. One is obviously entitled to discount off that maximum storage price, and so maybe there's some competitive advantage if you're able to do so. I don't know practically if there's much scope for that, but certainly that's the principle that I took away from that. The second thing is, I was involved in that matter before the Competition Tribunal, which was settled around, the SAFEX rate. And one of the issues there was cost benchmarking. And so that's why I want us all to be very clear that once you delve down that road on costs and other competitively sensitive information, that is quite a slippery slope. And before you know it, you might be perceived to be involved in some prohibited conduct by the competition authorities if they were ever to investigate. So being clear on the purpose for which you want to exchange competitively sensitive information, making sure that the information that you require is absolutely indispensable for the purpose, achievement of the purpose, and that it's for pro-competitive reasons. And that you're not just talking a good game and saying that you need the information, but there's a less restrictive means of obtaining the information. I think all of those are really, really important considerations to bear in mind. I would also suggest that if this is something that's being contemplated, one should look at the Commission's final guidelines on information exchange. Now, those guidelines are publicly available. They are not binding on the competition authorities. They intended to give some guidance to industry and private business, but there are some useful points in there just to get a legal framework or a better understanding of how the Competition Commission will look at things from their mandate. Because obviously they're a creature of statute and they must operate and act in accordance with their primary legislation, which is the Competition Act. So just some other comments as well from my side. I think it was one of Tom's comments about getting perhaps an index and maybe doing it yourselves as an association or as an industry, and appreciating that there are certain variables as well in terms of location and the efficiencies of the different silos. So one thing that did come to mind, just as a comment from my side, was I recall in the healthcare industry, there were a number of boards which issued pricing guidelines for various things, hospital procedures, medical procedures, and those sorts of things. Those price guidelines were not intended to be binding on its members, and they were intended really just to give some guidance to their members as to what an appropriate price would be for a particular procedure, for example. But the Competition Commission saw it differently. From their perspective, the concern was that if you're a body and you're issuing guidelines to your members, and your members are effectively competitors or potential competitors of one another because they're competing for business, the concern is that there might be a price convergence on whatever that rate is. If that rate is intended to be a maximum rate, the concern is that those who are currently priced under might converge at the higher rate, and that there might be very little discounting. So indirectly, almost a form of price fixing. The other concern is that you are then introducing some form of artificiality into the way in which prices are set. The economic theory is that all firms must set their prices independently. And as I think we've spoken about at the symposium, is that the market will then sort of determine what is the best price. If you're overpriced, customers are going to go to your competitors who are better priced or more efficient, and that's kind of how you weed these things out. So one must obviously be cautious about compiling your own benchmark or your own index and perhaps using it as a guideline when setting maximum prices. So although one can understand the commercial rationale for it and the good intentions behind it, one must just be careful that you don't inadvertently slip into that trap of an indirect price fix or suggesting certain levels to members. The other side of that, which is quite interesting from a lawyer's perspective, is that when the Competition Commission looks at an excessive price, there are certain requirements that must first be, or there are certain elements which the competition authorities must first demonstrate. One of which is that the firm is dominant in a particular market. So there's got to be a market definition from a competition law perspective, and then a determination of dominance. But if you're a dominant firm in the market, and you are, say, for example, following a guideline price, the Commission is going to look at your underlying costs and your efficiencies, amongst other things, to determine whether or not the price that you charge as a dominant firm is an excessive price or not. So the competition authorities are going to look at the underlying costs and how efficient you are, take into account a reasonable margin to determine whether or not the price is excessive or not. So one must also bear in mind that if you're in a particular locale or location where you're isolated from competition because silos are far apart, and so you've got a captive market, as it were, in terms of farmers who need to store grain or oilseed with you, you've also got to bear that in mind from a competition law perspective. One of the other comments I just want to make is that in practice, I've seen contraventions take place where members or people in the same industry get together with government and they consult on things around sort of pricing, or perhaps standards which affect pricing or component of a price. Now, one must be very careful about this collective bargaining mechanism unless you've got some form of exemption from the competition authorities. And we've seen in practice that in healthcare and in other industries, smaller market participants have been granted a conditional exemption for a certain period of time to engage in this collective negotiation or collective bargaining, especially in the private healthcare sector. But where it happens outside of a formal exemption which the competition authorities have granted, then there's obviously a risk that the competition authorities are going to regard that market consultation, as it were, as some form of coordination between competitors or collusive, or perhaps it'll be perceived as having a nefarious intent behind it. So again, the context in which these discussions, if they are going to be had, is quite important, and you're not absolved from any responsibility if you're talking collectively as an industry to, say, the JSE or some other government entity. So one must just bear that in mind. Just in terms of the way forward, I've jotted down a few ideas. I don't know to what extent they're all going to be practical and of equal utility, but one can obviously do a study based on what's publicly available. I think Fadi mentioned that there's public sources that are quite helpful. They're presumably international studies that one can use. So that's the first possible way forward, is maybe look at what's publicly available and see whether that could be used for the intended purpose. The second thing is, I think I've mentioned it already before, is before one engages in some form of conduct or collaboration or enter into any arrangements which could be potentially prohibited conduct, you can apply to the competition authorities for an exemption if you're able to motivate that the agreement or the conduct falls within the parameters of Section 10 of the Competition Act. So you could seek an exemption prior to entering into any such conduct or arrangement or agreements. And like I mentioned earlier, for those who hadn't joined yet, you don't ask for forgiveness after the fact, but you ask for permission in advance of engaging in the conduct, because you don't get sort of you don't get any reprieve if you've already participated in prohibited conduct. And we're talking here about, gray areas where very quickly things can turn and start looking like it's cartel or collusive conduct. The third thing that I've got on my list, Theo, is obviously if there's individual engagement with the JSE, having mentioned that, you know, collective or sort of market consultations could be problematic from a competition law perspective if you're talking or exchanging competitively sensitive information, then these individual engagements with the JSE is obviously something that's available to grain silo owners in the market, or even farmers or whoever has an interest. So those are just some of the things which perhaps you can think about, which might be helpful to the industry.
I'm going to ask you two follow-up questions. The first one is, who should be and I'm going to come to the JSE portion because that's an interesting angle, but who should be the party or the entity that kind of coordinates this kind of thing? Is it an independent entity? Is it a commodity organization? Is it a membership organization? What's your view on that?
So I think that's a good question. And it could be any one of those. There's no particular requirement in the legislation as to who the identity of the applicant needs to be, but it must of course be a body or an organization or a firm that is knowledgeable about the industry and is able to motivate properly why this intended conduct is necessary for the industry, and not just self-serving for particular participants in the industry, and why it meets the objectives in the Competition Act in order to be considered for an exemption. So there's no sort of threshold or legal requirement as to who can approach the competition authorities. But again, just be mindful that the manner in which you are putting this application together, you might be best served by using an independent party, such as, you know, a law firm who is going to receive submissions individually and then might collate the application on your behalf. Certainly when you are using, if you intend to conduct a study where potentially you might need to use competitively sensitive information, then certainly the Commission's guidelines advocate, or they motivate, that you should use an independent third party. And that could be sort of an auditing firm who's truly independent and who's not going to share that information with the exco or the board or the management of, say, for example, a trade association. Or you could use a firm of economists who's got experience and who are alive to the issues around sharing competitively sensitive information, or a law firm as well. So there might be a scope to use an independent third party, as you say, but some of that detail is obviously in the Commission's guidelines. So for additional context, I suggest that, you know, if this is the way that a body or a firm or an industry is thinking about going, there is useful context in those guidelines.
Then just I want to follow up on the question regarding the JSE. So it is within the rights of the competition legislation for the JSE to enter into discussion, because if we talk about who owns the silo infrastructure, it's not even a handful of companies that has the majority. To ask to enter into independent negotiations or discussions with those and then come up and say the current price of X is not the real price, the price should be X plus 3. Is that in the realm of that? Does that then fall outside of the rules and regulations of the Competition Commission?
So there are a few prohibitions that one's got to be mindful of from a competitional perspective. The most relevant one for this discussion is where there are interactions between competitors of one another, Section 4.1 of the Competition Act. So for purposes of Section 4.1, which apply to competitors or potential competitors, where a JSE is, for example, speaking to a supplier, or where any company is speaking to a customer or a supplier, those discussions don't take place on the level of competitors, i.e. they're not on the same level of the value chain. They're not competitors or potential competitors discussing pricing, costing, things of that nature. You're in a vertical relationship. Just for completeness, I must just say the Competition Act also regulates agreements between parties in a vertical relationship if it gives rise to substantial lessening or prevention of competition. But for purposes of this debate, what we're really concerned about is the exchange of competitively sensitive information in the context of competitors. So those individual discussions, yes, can take place. If it's between a company and its supplier or a company and its customer, they can take place. But whether the company then decides to independently change rates or charges, or whether it uses an objective index to do that, I mean, that's something that, you know, would depend on what the outcome of those conversations would be. But and maybe all lawyers say, but it obviously depends on the particular facts of the case, and one's still got to be mindful of Section 5.1, and one has to kind of stress test that whatever decision is made isn't going to inadvertently give rise to a substantial lessening or prevention of competition in terms of 5.1.
Much. I think that's very thorough, detailed information. We've got about 5 minutes left. Any questions from the audience? I've got a question. Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Maybe this has been answered, but there's a lot of information. Obviously, nobody is going to erect cement silos. What's the long-term alternative if we speak about reinvestment? What will our storage operators be building?
Who wants to start answering that question? Tom, jy het geglimlag, you smiled.
No, there are concrete silos being erected.
Yes.
Not by the current storers, by other parties in the... So, factually, they are being built. If you ask me personally, on our infrastructure, I would much rather reinvest in my current infrastructure, work on my product offering, and just to the competition lawyer's point, I will be very hesitant to be part of any benchmarking, because that's individual business intelligence that I will not share with anybody else. So I won't do that. It's not a question, Susanna, of what are we going to do? In our case, is what have we already done? And reinvestment and flexing your business model is, from a capital allocation point of view, we think it's successful.
I'm going to ask you, the people that are erecting cement silo infrastructure, what does that tell you about the components of the value chain and the return on the value chain?
Well, if nobody else does it and somebody does it, it says to me that there's margin there. There's excessive margin there. That's plain and simple.
And that's what the market is all about.
Yeah.
Where there's market, there'll be capital.
Yes. Yes. But that also will, in time, you know, has its consequence. So if you're uncompetitive pricing your product, your farmers if you shortchanging your farmer, they will find out and they will move away from you. That's what farmers do.
If you look at the trend in the market, then you will see where fixed structures was built is more closer to where manufacturing sites were. Or there's an increase in manufacturing site. Of course, there is a growing demand on product. Even in maize meal, there is an increase in demand. And if there is a new mill created, then there is new structures, and it's normally permanent structures that is erected there. So looking at what happened is more at the manufacturing side, but there's reasons for it. It's not necessarily all return on investment reasons that is done, but it's a requirement of quality and supply to that facility that needs to be secured. That's why there's strategic value or reasons why that is also erected.
Right, I'm going to ask, in the closing comments, Tom is going to ask everybody for their closing comments. So I'm not going to ask the closing comments now. But what I would like to ask is, in terms of, we've talked about this going forward. And my question to close, not to take away Tom's question, is this topic that we discussed is paramount important, but I want your view on this topic as it relates to the continuous food security on the one side, we've talked about that, but also the viability of the farmer on this side and the value chain. To what extent are we talking about refining, or to what extent are we talking about a real risk that is slowly going to catch us? Let's start, Francois.
Yeah, I truly don't think that there's a real risk that because of that there would be food insecurity. If there's governmental intervention on a large scale, I can promise you and I can guarantee you that it will happen.
But although we're refining, this is not an issue that links on that.
Yes, it's refining.
It's refining.
Yeah, I agree that we need refining, and it's not a total collapse or something that there's not a threat at the moment. The one thing, free market will sort it out if we're on a free market. So, for instance, if the rates are too low, then you can deregister your silos on the stock exchange. You don't need to be there. You can charge a different rate. So then the price discovery and the financing and all of that comes into play, which make it a problem for the farmer and for the consumer and for the manufacturing. But we're not there.
For you?
No, certainly I agree with Francois and Tom what they just said. I think we just need refining and retuning some of the standards that are currently in place. And I think also what I've observed and with the engagements we've had this year with the number of operators, and what I've noted is they have the ability to actually charge below or over the JC storage rate. So it just shows you that there is that ability to do that, but then it boils down to the business model.
Do you want to add anything to that? I think you noted the fact that we are talking about refining,
correct,
not addressing a massive risk.
Yeah, no, exactly, Theo, and I think we'll give some closing comments here, but it's essentially refinement, and again, acknowledging the structures that we already have in place, which are amazing. So, you know, these are items that we're identifying that we can work together as a collective. Without, you know, the trading, and this is where the Competition Commission sometimes, let's be honest, it makes it difficult, because there are opportunities where we could gain some deeper insights, and which could potentially be beneficial for the value chain. But you know, we are careful and doing that in a certain way. But that doesn't take away the bigger concerns too around. I think we have, and you know, just referring to all these master plan discussions that we had, all the elements and the bigger concerns around growth over the next 10 years, inclusiveness. You know, we have idle land. We have a lot of idle land. And if you want to bring in new market participants, this environment is extremely competitive and currently very risky and getting more risky to put your capital down. So we need to think together about these. And Francois, you've pointed to some of these 3 or 4 big elements. You know, if we can't address those together, we're going to struggle with that growth rate and unlocking more growth. So I think that's ultimately, we're talking about a small refinement here, but these refinements, I think we can deal with them in a collective way and saying, well, the market is going to respond, Tom, you're right. But there are certain elements over the next 10 years which the market, the way that's going to respond, I think we're going to miss growth opportunity. I think this might be at a lower scale in terms of growth. I think we're going to have growth and adjustments, but the ones that Francois mentioned are the big hitters that are going to avoid or hamper growth over the next 10 years.
And they are, in terms of our topic here, for make it sure the sector is sustainable and the return on investment must be there. Those factors are higher up on the priority list than talking about refinement here. This is the end of our discussion. I want to thank the participants. Now, we have a book for that Wandile wrote. I had the privilege of yesterday afternoon buying the book at the airport in Cape Town and reading it on the aeroplane. It is well worth the read. I think it's a very important topic, and I think it is for anybody that wants to look at where we should change tack and change course in terms of looking for solutions. I certainly think it's well worth the read. He creates the difference between our very competitive, extremely efficient commercial farming sector and then the challenge of a sector that is not bringing us the results that it could be, and how do you match these two agriculture sectors in one country? Wessel?
Theo, thank you. I have, sorry, somebody is showing. Okay, yes, I agree with you. So, Wandile is not with us today, so he will join us tomorrow, but I would like to maybe to call Ruth to the front. I really appreciate your participation in today's session. Asking those two questions. This is a book signed by Wandile, so you're very privileged to get a signed copy. And thank you for your participation. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Ru. Thank you, Theo. Thank you, Tom.
Yes. Yes, Wessel, brings us to the end of the session, and I would like to pose the question. And what is the message you want to send us away today from each of you? What do you think the discussion, what came out of the discussion, and what do you think we need to go and think about tomorrow, looking back at what we discussed today, and what the outcomes of that should be? Maybe you said in the beginning, Theo, that you don't want to have an opinion today, but I need your opinion on this. Maybe we can start with you.
A few elements. Number one, we've got a well-functioning agriculture food system around grain. And why I say grain, this is what we're talking about. This is the grain infrastructure we're talking about. We've got a well-functioning system that delivers quality product at an affordable price that is healthy and that people can plan along the lines. So that's what we've got. But that, however, doesn't mean that we need to continuously look at enhancing the efficiency of that system. And that system needs to be able to grow, to attract investments as and when required. And that means capacity should it be required. But it also means that the structure of that system should be allowed in an environment where the market and capital dictates what capital is invested. Because if you start to move that around, if you move the allocation of capital or the capital decision around, somewhere you're going to weaken the system and somewhere it's going to bite you. So I'm very hesitant to create structures that inhibit it. Having said that, there needs to be a set of rules. I always, in investments incidentally, I had a professor who used to say that in the investment world, if you equate it to rugby, if you don't like the line-out rules, it will not help you to select short locks. It doesn't work. So if there's a set of rules, you should compete in that framework. And I think where we should rather focus us on is to say, is that set of rules efficient for the private sector to go out and compete, being it lineouts or scrums, but to compete attractively. The point of departure is we've got a well-functioning supply chain, a well-functioning value chain, and we rather should spend time on enhancing that and trying to make it as efficient and competitive as possible.
Thank you. Ferdy?
Yeah, maybe just to quickly add on to Theo. So it's effective, it's great, It's not ideal. There are always elements, but it's a heck lot better than what we're seeing in other parts of the world and the continent. And I think that's what something, once you lose that, you're struggling to get it back. So a lot of the value chain work that we're doing also on our Africa's up north, countries up north, it's extremely, just getting private sector investments back once it's gone. It's very difficult. And I think that's a key message going out. And we need the private sector investments to address the transformation in the country, to move the country forward. It requires private sector and government to work together. And we can't have that disconnect we need to try and find opportunities in this competitive environment where we can make it, where we can build the transformation. So if the margins are so tight and there's no investment, there's even less chance for anyone that's coming in new to invest or to be part of a value chain. So that's why I think the collective refinement's required, but certainly not changing things in terms of the private sector playing a leading role in terms of investments, very important.
Thank you very much. For you.
No, thank you, Tom. I think certainly I agree with Vidi. I think from my side in the JSE, I think first we appreciate, the role of storage operators that they play in this industry is magnificent. And I think, the way they actually safeguard our goods in the silos, and again, it's very important that they guarantee the quality and the quality of the product, especially the role that they play on the JC, because the product, it has to be guaranteed to the end client or buyer. But then on the other side, I think we need to be very careful. I've listened to all these conversations, and I think what Yanni said earlier on to say, it seems like it's only one side that's here today, but then we need the whole market to actually come together and actually raise these points, discuss them, and say, okay, what are the solutions going forward? And again, the JSE is open. We are there to listen to the whole market, and when they submit that extensive research, we also then will assess it, and then we'll also go through the process of saying, now let's go to a market consult. So I think that's just the basis of the role that the JSE will play in this study. And I think, from what I've heard today, I think there is an alignment of that. We need to fix certain things in this market, but then it's not broken. It's still working well. Thank you.
Thank you. From your side.
Yes, Tom. So we've got about 40 main commodities that we produce in value chains. We're able to produce affordable, sufficient and safe food to our 60.7 million people. Plus, around 50% of the SADC region, plus in most of those we export. So if you just say that we have efficient functioning value chains, yes, there will always be minor alterations. The big ticket issues that we need to tackle is what happens above us at political level, at infrastructure levels. Those are the things that we have to change. If we don't change that, and that is your most basic right, every South African, you have the right to vote, exercise that. Otherwise, if you will get what you deserve, and business will move. If that doesn't comply to international standards, they will simply move. And as Ferdi says, once you've lost it, you won't get it back.
Yes. Dominique, from your side.
Thank you, Tom. Well, I just want to use this opportunity to say thank you very much to yourself and to Wessel for the opportunity to form part of the symposium. I also just want to thank Theo for moderating, and obviously my fellow panel members for an interesting and robust discussion. I'm heartened by the fact that there are still opportunities to have these proactive debates about important and topical issues. And from my perspective, I think it's as Francois had said, if you want to be proactive and adapt the strategy, then there's certainly a way in which one can navigate the legalities of how you want to achieve a particular outcome. But unfortunately, there are rules to a game, and in much the same way there's legislation which one is to be mindful of and operate within the confines of. But I like to think that there's a way in which one can do it safely. And if that means approaching the Commission for an exemption or doing it in another way, I think if one is prepared to make the investment in time and resources to think about how one can best go about it, then I'm confident that one can find a solution.
Thank you, Dominic. From my side, I think the message that I would like to convey is there is something that we have to discuss. It's awareness in the industry that the rest of the industry of the value chain must be aware as well, that there is pressure points in the system and we have to discuss it. And obviously in the past we came to solutions of that. I think we will find the solution again. I want to thank everybody for the participation today, for the people out there who remotely joined us. Thank you for watching it, and for everybody here, we really appreciate your presence, and thank you and your support. And then I think there's going to be another video clip on the sponsors.
Growing your business in Africa takes a financial specialist with over 150 years of Pan-African experience, a leading corporate and investment bank with a presence in 12 African countries and global offices in London and New York. It takes a deep understanding of investment flows, market participants, sector trends, and regulations on the continent. It takes Absa CIB, your financial specialist in Africa. The bravery to imagine and the will to get things done. That's Africanacity.
Stargate Scientific, your preferred partner for GMO and mycotoxin testing. Stargate Scientific, a leading provider of laboratory equipment and consumables, has partnered with Envirologics, the world's leading producer of rapid GMO and mycotoxin testing kits, to bring you international expertise that solves local grain challenges. With over 20 years of experience in its field, Envirologics offers innovative, scientific testing solutions that provide traceable and reliable results to the agricultural sector. So whether you need a leaf or seed test in minutes, on the farm or in the silo, in the factory or in the laboratory, we have the right solution for you. Envirologics, through Stargate Scientific, brings you some key testing solutions for your grain management. Our rapid quantification test system, called QuickScan, is used to test for GMO. It allows you to accept more grain into your system, but not unnecessarily rejecting crops that have mere traces of GMO. This pioneering technology gives you a tremendous advantage in making critical decisions in just a few short minutes. Not only does QuickScan ensure grain quality, but it also eliminates wastage, improves efficiency, and increases profits. So say goodbye to the guesswork of storing and managing your non-GMO grain. QuickScan also allows you to test for various mycotoxins. Food safety is of paramount importance globally. It is vital to detect early outbreaks of any toxins that could jeopardize valuable food resources and negatively impact the health of society. Furthermore, an outbreak of a toxin-infested crop may ruin your company's reputation and finances. That is why mycotoxin testing is absolutely essential to ensuring general food safety as well as your business's survival. Envirologics was the first company to introduce a rapid lateral flow strip to test for mycotoxin in grain, and is yet again the first to offer a groundbreaking product which allows the rapid quantification of different mycotoxins in one common sample extract. This test not only saves you considerable time, but has been made easy for anyone to run. Even though there will be continuous new developments in biotech companies that may make it difficult to detect GMO content in new crops using lateral flow strips, you don't have to worry, because Stargate Scientific and Envirologics always has you covered. Envirologics is consistently ahead of the learning curve, and our innovative scientific solutions ensure that our technology will constantly be at the forefront of any agricultural challenges that grain handlers may face. One such example is Envirologics' patented rapid DNA-based tests, another first to the market. These tests are the next line of technology into which huge investments are being made and are designed to detect GMO content that may not be picked up by lateral flow strips. So with the Envirologics and Stargate Scientific partnership, you're in safe hands. Not only do we help you significantly reduce risk, we also ensure the quality and safety of your grain and give you the peace of mind you deserve. We look forward to working with you on your next GMO or mycotoxin test.
Thank you, everybody. We come to the end of the session.